Baruch Hashem. Today is the Daf Yomi for Shabbos, and we're discussing the concept of how do we know that the idea is. We're on the top. First of all, we're on Daf Tes, Daf 9, and the Daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim, Atzal for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. And the Daf is discussing, or on the top of Tes Amud Aleph, the Daf is discussing the idea that the Mishnah has told us that if it was a goat, that if you have no yediyah at the beginning, you didn't know you were ever tamei, and then you went into the Beis Hamikdash, and then afterwards you found out you were tamei, that the sire, the goat that is brought for the Musaf of Yom Kippur, serves as an atonement. And so the Gemara says the source for this, and this is from the Rabbanan. But according to Rabbi Yishmael, who says, it says the Gemara on top of Tes Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yishmael the Amar, Ein ba yediyah b'tchila v'yesh ba yediyah v'sof bar carbon. Who, according to Rabbi Yishmael, who says that if there's no yediyah at the beginning, but there is yediyah at the end, you bring the carbon all of the yored. If that's the case, the sire nase b'chutz amay mechaper. So what is the sire that is brought outside? Why is it mechaper al she'en ba'yediyah lo b'tchila lo b'sof? Why does it serve as an atonement? What does it serve as an atonement for? So that's the Gemara's question. Meaning to say, we can't say it serves as an atonement for ein ba'yediyah b'tchila b'yediyah b'sof, because that is going to be requiring a carbon all of the yored. So what is the styra natsa b'chutz mechaper for? So the Gemara says, Al she'ein ba'yediyah lo b'tchila v'lo b'sof. So it's serving as an atonement for whether you never have any knowledge of it, not at the beginning or not even at the end. Of course, says, what are you talking about? Hi sirei agom sirei rosh chodesh mechaper. The sire of Yontif and of Rosh Chodesh serves as an atonement for that. So Gemara says, no, Rabbi Shmuel holds like Rabbi Meir. Savrach Rabbi Meir the Amar koatz the irim kaparatan shaveh al tumas mikdash v'kadashav. He says, no, he holds like Rabbi Meir says, all of these goats, the goat of the Musaf, Yom Kippur, and the Regalim, and Rosh Chodesh, are all going to be able to atone for tumas mikdash v'kadashav. So if that's the case, the Gemara says, we go back to the question we said before, meaning to say, if that's the case, why was it Sire Nas V'chutz compared to the Sire inside? Meaning to say, since Rabbi Yishmael is of the position that the Sire Nas V'chutz is also going to atone for Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashiv, where you have no Yediyah, not at the beginning, not at the end. And so therefore you can't say that the Sire Pnimi and the Sire Nas V'chutz are comparable, that they're both atoning for Tumah that have some sort of knowledge. So since the Sire Nas V'chutz is talking about Tumah that you have no knowledge, so what's the purpose of the comparison? So it's to tell us, it's to tell us that in the end they're only atoning for the sin of Yediyah, Tumas Mikdash V'Kadasha. But even though you don't have Yediyah by the Chutz at all, still they both only serving atonement for that. So now the Gemara comes on to the next line of the Mishnah. It says, Al she'en ba'yediyah b'tchila v'lo b'sof. You have no Yediyah in the beginning or the end. Sirei regalim, sirei rosh chadashim mechaper. And the goat of Yontif and the goat of Rosh Chodesh are serving as an atonement. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reasoning for Rabbi Yehuda, who says that all the goats are mechaprim for Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav, who have no Yediyah at all, except for the Chatas of Yom Kippur. So the Gemara explains that the source for it is, we're at the two dots, Jeff, in the middle of Tes Amud Aleph. Basically, the Gemara has asked, Rabbi Yehuda's position is that if you have never had any Yediyah, you don't know that you're all Tameh, and the Seirei of Regalim and the Seirei of Rosh Chodesh serve as an atonement for it. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reason why the goats of Rosh Chodesh and Yontif serve as an atonement if you never have any idea. So the Gemara explains, Amar Kra, it's based upon the fact that the pasuk says, "Usiiri zim echad lechatos laHashem." It says that with respect to the Sayer of Rosh Chodesh, you should bring one goat for a sin offering, chatos laHashem. And so that's to tell us, says Rabbi Yehuda, Chet she'imakir bo el Hashem. A chet, a sin that only God knows about it. You never have any idea about it. So, yea, sayer zeh mechaper. So this goat shall serve as an atonement. Gemara says you can't use the pasuk for that. This chatos laHashem. Look at the Rish Lakish. Don't we need this like Rish Lakish taught? The Amar Rish Lakish, why is the goat of Rosh Chodesh different that it says l'chatos laHashem, and by all the other festival sin offerings it just says chatos echad, and it doesn't say laHashem? So why is the goat of Rosh Chodesh different? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so it's to tell us that God is saying, this goat is going to be an atonement for me, as though God is saying, I need atonement because I diminished the moon. What's this a reference to? This is a reference to the story that's brought down. The story that's brought down in the Gemara in the Gemara at the beginning of Chulin, that the moon said to God, you can't have two rulers ruling the world. You can't have both me and the sun the same size. So God says, you're right, and I'm going to diminish you. And since God diminished the moon, he now is saying, I need an atonement for it. And so that's why it's the Sayer of Rosh Chodesh is almost an atonement for God. And so if that's the case, we can't use this extra word to tell us that it refers to the Sayer Izim of Rosh Chodesh refers to a sin that only God knows about. It's a very powerful idea that God is saying he needs an atonement. So the Gemara says, Im kain lemakra al Hashem. My Hashem, look at that. No, so it would have said Sayer Chatat al Hashem. Why did they say for Hashem? Like for both of these things, both that only God knows about it, and also an atonement for God. So maybe the whole drasha is to say only for a sin that God knows about, and not for Rish Lakish. Gemara says no. Imke neimakra chatos Hashem. My Hashem. Why do we do from the fact that it says Hashem Shema Minas Tarati? So we see that it's atoning for both of these things, for a sin that only God knows about, and also for the sin for God sin. So the Gemara says, why do we say that the goats are only atoning for these specific sins? Why don't we say that it's also atoning for additional sins, in addition to Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav? Gemara says, Tana de Rabbi Ishmael says, since the Sayer of Yom Kippur, we learn it out from the Sayer of Yom Kippur. Since the Sayer of Yom Kippur comes at a specific time, and also the Sayer of Rosh Chodesh comes at a specific time, just like the goat of Yom Kippur only atones for Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav. So it's also this only atoning only for that sin. The Gemara says, okay, Ashkechan Seirei Rosh Chadashim. We find that the goat of Rosh Chodesh atones for the sin of Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav. Sirei Regalim Minon. How do we know that the goats of the Musaf of the festivals also atone for the sin of Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav? And if you want to say this is also like Rabbi Yishmael taught, and if you want to say that this is also like the debate Rabbi Yishmael taught, that just like the Sayer Yom Kippur and the Sayer Rosh Chodesh have a fixed time, so too the Sayer of the festivals is a fixed time, and so therefore we compare it to them, and that's going to serve as an atonement for Tumas Mikdash Kedashav. Equal Mifrach, we can break that because they say Imi de Rosh Chodesh Shekain Tadir. If you want to say that you want to learn it out from Rosh Chodesh, you can't, because Rosh Chodesh is more often than the festivals. And Yom Kippurim shekem meruba kaparaso. You can't learn out from Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur atones for all the sins, and so therefore, it's possible that it has more of an atonement than the sin of the festivals. If you want to say that's not a question, if you want to say, wait, we didn't ask a question, how can we learn Rosh Chodesh from Yom Kippur? Why are we saying, how can we learn the festivals from Yom Kippur? No, so the Gemara says, no, by Rosh Chodesh, Hasam, Kapara, Miltav Ktive. There, by Rosh Chodesh, we know it's serving as an atonement because it says Chatos Hashem, which implies that it's coming to serve as an atonement for a sin that only God knows about it. So, and the comparison to Yom Kippur is just Giluye Milsa Ba'amro. It's not a real learning out. It's not a real derivation. It's just, hold on, let me just finish the sentence. It's just the Giluye Milsa. It's just revealing it. But by the festivals, we could say we can't learn anything else from the Yontif to the from Yom Kippur to the Yom Tovim. Yes, Jeff. No, I can't hear you, Jeff. I can't hear you.
Sorry. On Yom Kippur, the goats that are sacrificed in the inner altar and the outer altar are still fairly limited in what they atone for, right? It's just the tuma. It's just the tuma issue. It's the goat of Azazel that atones for all the other sins. Is that right? Am I right about that? Or
yes. Yes, the goat itself is only atoning for those limited sins, but the day itself is much greater. So therefore, there's many more atonements on that day than on Yom Tif. So that's the idea. But you're asking a good question, but that's the way we.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that if it's the Azazel goat that is the catch-all atonement, let's say, then it doesn't quite fit this paradigm for Rosh Chodesh and Chagim, where it's an actual sacrifice as opposed to the Azazel procedure, which is a whole different. It's sui generis.
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, but I'm saying that the goat, we've said so far that the goat that's brought inside atones for Tumas Mikdash, where you don't know about it, where you knew about it but didn't know. The goat outside atones where you knew about it at the beginning, but you didn't know about it. We said where you knew about it at the beginning, but you didn't know about it. You didn't know about the beginning, but you know about it at the end. And so now we're saying, what about and then we said, if you have no knowledge of it at the beginning or the end, then Rabbi Yehuda says the goat of the festivals and the goat of Rosh Chodesh are mechaper for it. And we want to know what's the source of it. So we said, okay, let's figure out what the source for Rosh Chodesh is. And we did Rosh Chodesh is by comparing it to Yom Kippur. So there's a comparison. So then we say, and this comparison is aided by Chatas Lashem, by the verse. So what about the Yontif? We can't compare the Yontif to Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur has an extra feature, which is Kaparas and Meruba. It is more atonement on it. That Yom Kippur atones for all of the sins. So I understood your question to me, but these goats aren't atoning for all the sins. But the nature of the day is so strong that it allows these sacrifices to atone for these sins. That's the way I understood it. So still, we're looking. It's okay. I mean, that's the way I understand it now. So hopefully that helps. Back to Tesla Bays, the Gemara is saying, okay, so what's the source that the sire of the Yontif atones for the tumas of Mikdash v'Kadasha? What's the source for that? It's the source for that is based upon the fact that it says Sa'ir izim echad lechatas, and also it says Sa'ir izim echad lechatas. It says the Torah could have written Sa'ir izim echad lechatas, but instead it writes U'Sa'ir izim echad lechatas, an extra vav, to tell us that hachinami Sa'ir v'Sa'ir. So just like the Torah says. So also here, the Torah could have written Seir and it wrote Useir. So the Ishkush Sirei Regalim was Sirei Rosh Chodashim. So we compare the Regilim to Rosh Chodesh. Ma Sirei Rosh Chodashim Ein Mechaprim El Al Shein B'Yediyah O B'Tchila Bo B'Sof. Av Sirei Regalim Ein Mechaprim El Al Shein B'Yediyah O B'Tchila Bo B'Sof. So it's by comparing it to from the extra word Useir from Useir. That's how we learned it out. Okay, so now, and we're going to get into that limud on Daf Yud. So now the Gemara has a question. So we're talking about a sin that you have no knowledge about it. Ki Amar Rabbi Yehuda, when Rabbi Yehuda says that Sirei Regam and Sirei Shchodesh are mechaper al she'im b'yediyah lo b'tchila b'sof, hani mili b'cheit she'in sof olivada. Is this referring to a sin that you'll never know about? Aval cheit she'sof olivada. But if it's a sin that eventually other people will tell you about it, is it like now a sin that you will know about, that you know about in the end? And then we'll say, and therefore the Yom Kippur atones for it. Or do we say, even a sin that you'll eventually know about, is going to be considered since even though people will eventually know about it, we still right now only call it a sin that only God knows about it, and so therefore it's the goat of Rosh Chodesh and the Yontif that atone. Tashma, the Gemara says, let's bring an answer. The Tanya she'em b'yediyah lo b'tchila v'lo b'sof v'cheit she'sof ulida sira gam sira shchodeshem chaper and Rabbi Yehuda. So we say it doesn't matter even if you'll know about it, even if somebody else will tell you about it in the end, it's going to be considered like the one you don't know about now, and Rosh Chodesh and Yantif are mechaper for it, to go to Rosh Chodesh and Yantif. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Seirei haragolim mechaprim avolo sirei Rosh Chodashim. Rabbi Shimon says the goat of the Yantif are going to atone for Tumas Mukdash Kedashiv, and not the Sirei Rosh Chodashim. So what are the goat of Rosh Chodesh atoning for? If a Torah person ate tamei food, ate tamei kachin. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Shai, my time of the Rabbi Shimon. From where did Rabbi Shimon learn that the goat of Rosh Chodesh atone for a person whose Torah ate the carbon whose tamei? Amar Kra, it's based upon the fact that the verse says, with respect to the sin of the sire that Bnei Aaron burnt on the day that the Mishkan was built, Moshe said to them, why did you not eat from this chatas? It's Kodesh Kadoshim, but why didn't you eat it from it in the courtyard? And why did you burn it? That he says, this was given to you to bear the sin of the community. And that day was Rosh Chodesh. And V'yolav avon avon mitzitz. And Rabbi Shimon expounds Gzeira Shava, the word sin, that is said here from the sin that was said with respect to the tzitz. Nemar kan avon v'nemar la'alon avon. La'alon tumas basar. Just like the avon that said with reference to a tzitz is referring to tuma of meat, and the tzitz atones for it. That if the meat of the olah or the chalev or the blood was brought after it was tamei, that they don't need to bring another carbon because the tzitz atones for it. Afkan, also here, Rosh Chodesh, we're going to say tumas basar, that if a Kohen who is tahor ate the meat that was tamei, it's going to serve as atonement. The Gemara asks, Imal Owen. If that's the case, maybe by Rosh Chodesh, just like by the tzitz, the karbonos go on the altar. The tzitz does not atone for the sin. Afkan, also by the Sarah of Rosh Chodesh, we should say that it's Owen, that it atones for the karbanos that went up on the altar, but it's not for the Kohen who eat it. Maybe it just teaches us that it goes up on the altar, but not that it atones for the Kohen. So the Gemara says, no, avona idaksiv. No, it atones for the sin. So the Gemara says, Michta migmar gamri me'adadi. So since the Sarah Rosh Chodesh is learned out from the tzitz, then why don't we say nechaper to Rosh Chodesh adi devat the tzitz? Why don't we say that the Rosh Chodesh serves as an atonement for what it atones for, and also for the Kohen who ate the meat that's flesh? Why do we need the tzitz at all? Let's say the tzitz broke, and so does he need to do a kapara? Say no, the Sarah of Rosh Chodesh does it. Amakra avon echad hu noseh ve'ein noseh shnei avon echad hu noseh ve'ein noseh shnei avonos. carries one sin and not two. The Gemara says, again, same question. Why don't we say that the tzitz serves as an atonement for itself and the goat of Rosh Chodesh? And the nafkamino will be in a circumstance where a person became tummy after the Rosh Chodesh carbon was brought. Amar Kra, or the person ate the meat that was tamei after Rosh Chodesh was brought. Amar Kra, v'osa, osa no se'avon ve'in acheres no se'avon. It only serves one. Ravashi says a different explanation. Ksiv acha avona eda. So it means eda v'lo kachim. The sin of the community, and not for the sacrificial food. So therefore, it only atones for somebody who eats the meat while he's the meat that's tamei, but not a carbon that was brought in tamei. Bahasam ksiv, with respect to the tzitz, it says avona kadashim v'lo eda. That the sin of eating the meat that was tamei and not the community. So we find that the goat of Rosh Chodesh atones for someone who's tahor, who ate tamei food, by comparing it to the tzitz. So what's Rabbi Shimon's source for the idea that the goat of the regalim atone for somebody who never has knowledge of their sin? Seir. It says, "Useir izim echanal chatas." Extra vav. Hachanami also here seir, meaning to say ishke sir regal and sir ish kodesh. We compare the regal to Rosh Chodesh. Maser Rosh Chodesh, milsa the kodesh mechapri. Just like the goat of Rosh Chodesh atones with matters of that are kodesh. After regal and milsa the kodesh mechapri atones with matters that are kodesh. V'chitema nechapru ad Rosh Chodesh. And if you want to say that it should tone for that which the sire of Rosh Chodesh atones for, i.e., somebody who's taro ate basar tamei. Armin osa no se'avon ve'in achar no se'avon. Only the chatas of Rosh Chodesh carries that sin, and not something else. Maybe it atone for the same thing as Yom Kippur. Meaning to say, if you only have knowledge after the fact. Armin on achas b'shana kapara zugoteo achas b'shana. So it only the Yom Kippur is only once. Only one thing atones for it. So Gemara says, Amai mechapri. So what do the goats of the festivals atone for? If you want to say if you have knowledge at the beginning and the end, I bar korban who? No, you bring a korban. If you want to say knowledge at the beginning but not in the end, I saw not b'fnim Yom Kippur Torah that we already established was that's the goat of the inside of Yom Kippur. And if it's knowledge that not at the beginning, only at the end, it's only the goat that's done outside and Yom Kippur. So therefore, what's left? Oh, it's only atones for something which you have no knowledge at the beginning or at the end. Okay, that's the daf yomi for Shabbos. Obviously, we need to go over it a few more times in order to get it right.